Hello, everybody. My name is Malvina Montini, a member of the strategic communication team of European Guanxi and the head of the Twitter team. Today, I will moderate an event that will be centered around China's legal system. We will better understand, thanks to our speaker's presentation, the title of today's webinar, Chinese Law, a Paradigm. I remind you to please turn your microphones and camera off. China's legal system is vast and complex, and reliable information on the subject is difficult to obtain. Dr. Toti will provide us with a comprehensive look at the Chinese legal system, including how it works in practice, theoretical and historical support, and how it might evolve. Now I'm going to introduce our speaker for today. It is a pleasure to be welcoming our speaker, Enrico Toti. Enrico Toti has specialized in Chinese law since 1997. He obtained a PhD in Roman law and now teaches Chinese law at the Department of Law of the Roma III University. He taught comparative law and international law at the Shanghai International Studies University, where he was awarded the Certificate of Merit for exceptional dedication to the teaching activity carried out. He has held lectures and seminars at Columbia University, Beijing Normal University, and other Chinese universities, and conferences in Italy and China. He is the author and editor of numerous publications on Chinese law and translation into Italian of the main Chinese civil, corporate, and IP law. He is also the founder of the ChinaLex website. In 2020, he published as author the monographic text Diritto cinese dei contratti e sistema giuridico romanistico, tra legge e dottrina. He is also a lawyer in charge of the China Desk Milan office and NCTM law firm. Stay with us until the end to share your thoughts with us on our poll on the topic. It really matters to us. And at the end of the webinar, you will see a poll displayed on your screen asking you to select the answer to a few questions. The answer you provide will allow us to get and analyze your opinions to our newsletter. You can find out more on how to actively contribute to European Guanxi's newsletter viewers' perspective by contacting the IG team, editorial team via email. Send email. I will send the email in the chat. And the mail is editorialteam.gmail.com. This is a great opportunity for us to know more about your views and give you a dialogue space within our network and readers community. Before leaving the floor to our speaker, I remind you once more to please turn your microphones and camera off. Now I give the floor to Dr. Toti. And thank you again for being here today.
Malvina, thanks a lot, and thanks a lot to Mauro for this webinar. And today I'm here just for you, and I will do my best just to give all information and just to share with you my experience about Chinese law. I prepared some very simple slide just to give you some information, and then I really hope that there will be a lot of questions so that we can dialogue together. And so I shared the screen, and let me see. Okay, and so that we can proceed with our webinar. Okay, so the title is Chinese Law Paradigm, because the the question is now the Chinese law a new model, is a new system of law? This is the main question that we must to ask. You know very well that now when we approach China, it's very complex to approach China. But today we will focus our attention about Chinese law. Here, there are some warnings when we approach the Chinese law. The first warning is about the source of law. Why? Because in China is not so easy just to find the right source or sources of law, because usually you can find a national law, but then there are a lot of regulation for every province, or there are some administrative regulation or local regulation. So when you approach the Chinese law, the first warning is about the source of law. Then the second warning is about the language. And now, please listen to me. You can find the English translation of the Chinese law, but sometimes the translation is not so exact. So there are a lot of misunderstanding. So if you really want to understand the Chinese law, the best way is just to read the Chinese version of the law. So the official version of the law. Then there's a gap between the law on the books and law in action. About this issue, in every country there's a gap between the law on the books and the law in action. But especially in China, there's this kind of gap. Why this happens? Because the legislator, when write the law are very clear, and there are a lot of rights. But then when we talk about the law in action, the protection of your right is not so efficient. So the third warning is the gap between law on the books and the law in action. Then, when you approach the Chinese law, you cannot focus just the attention to the law, but you must pay attention to the law, to the hard law, and to the soft law. What I want to tell you that when I started just to study and to research about Chinese law in 1997, the Chinese law was very, very simple. Also, in a single law, you could find just a few articles. Now the text of the law are very complex, and so you must read a lot just to understand the meaning of the single article or the meaning of the law. So there's the complexity of the situation. And then sometimes it's also very important that you must just pay attention, not only to the text, but sometimes it's also very important, for example, the thinking of Xi Jinping. You must pay a lot of attention, not only to the text of the law, but also to the soft law that have the power to influence the text of the law. Then the last warning is the attention that you must to pay to the title of the law and the content of the law, because sometimes the Chinese legislator pay a lot of attention just to translate the Chinese law into English version, but with a lot of misunderstanding. So do not pay just attention to the title, but read the text, go in deep of the text just to understand the real content of the law. So when you approach the Chinese law, that Chinese law is just a very partial knowledge about China, but when you approach the Chinese law, please never forget this warning. Never forget this warning, because these warnings are the right key to understand in a clear way the Chinese law. When we talk about the Chinese law, we must also to understand the history of the Chinese law. And here in these two slides, I will show you in a very simplified way the history of the Chinese law. You must to understand that until the end of the 20th century, the Chinese law was not so codified. There was the criminal law, but the commercial law and the private law was not so codified. But then China decided to codified the law. But which is the model that China choose for the codification of the law? The model is the Roman law. And now, when I tell you Roman law, it also means German law, Italy law, French law, Austrian law, Swiss law. So China choose the Roman law model. And why China choose the Roman law or the civil law? Because the civil law is codified and well organized. So it's very easy also not to copy, but it's very easy to approach and to understand. Then in the civil law, you can find some universal principle, like the principle of fairness, freedom, and equality. Then in the civil law is very important, the part that is devoted to the contract. And you know very well how the Chinese legislator pay attention to the contract and to the market and to the exchange. Now, if you ask me, but how is the situation of the law in China today? Never forget that the Chinese legislator at the beginning, he started with the with the codification of the commercial law. Then with the codification of the private law, and now with the codification of administrative law and environmental law. Why I tell you this? Because the Chinese legislator at the beginning pay attention to the commercial law, because the China had the need to codify this part of the law. And only nowadays the China is codification, is doing the codification about the administrative law. And you know very well the distinction between the commercial law, private law, and administrative law. When we talk about the administrative law, the content of the administrative law is just to fix the behavior, the position of the citizen and of the central power. And so now China nowadays is working about the codification of the administrative law. So if you ask me, but which is the situation of the Chinese law? Chinese law choose the model of the civil law. This is the model because it's well organized, it's codified, and there are some very important and universal principles. But at the same time, if you ask me, but is there are some seeds about common law? Yes, because in 2010 arose the role of the jurisprudence with the guiding case. So now you can find in this structure of the Chinese law, the frame is the civil law, but at the same time, there is also a very important rule of the jurisprudence. And you know very well that the jurisprudence is the main characteristic of the common law. Then in this year, we have the Chinese Civil Code, and this code becomes an important milestone of the Chinese law, and it's very, very important that the Chinese Civil Code confirm between the relation between the Chinese civil law and the civil law system. And there's a continuous flow of enrichment between the Chinese civil law and the system. Why is so important when we talk about Chinese law? Listen to me. It's very important just to understand your approach to the Chinese law, because we can approach when we approach the Chinese law, it's very important just to use an approach of the comparative law, just to face the characteristic of the different legal system. You know very well that in the world there are different legal systems, but the most important legal system are the civil law and the common law. The Chinese civil law belong to the civil law system, but you can find some seeds and some institute of the common law. For example, in the Chinese civil law, even if the Chinese civil law belong to the civil law, you can find the trust, and the trust is a typical institute of the common law. So what I want to underline that the approach of the Chinese legislator is a pragmatic approach. It chooses the frame of the civil law, but at the same time, he transplanted some institute of the common law, the trust, the broker, the franchising, and other institutes. At the same time, one of the characteristics of the civil law is that is the code, the codification, and the written law. But you know very well that in China, everything changed in a very quickly way. And so the instrument to face all these quickly changement of reality are the guiding cases of the People Supreme Court. And so it's very important that the Chinese civil law utilize also the jurisprudence, but the jurisprudence is the main characteristic of the common law. And then nowadays, you cannot forget also the role of the artificial intelligence in the justice. Is for this kind of reason that the main question, the main issue is that if nowadays the Chinese law is a new model, is a new paradigm. This is the main important issue. And if you ask me, but why is it so important just to underline that the Chinese civil law belongs to the civil law system? Because sometimes the law is not so clear, and where you can find the solution, how you if there's a gap, how you can solve, where you can find the solution. You can find the solution in the civil law system, because the Chinese legal system, that is like a small box, is inside the big box that is the Chinese civil law system. There's the law, and here there is the system. So if in the Chinese civil law there's some gap that you know how to solve the problem, you must find the solution in the principle of this big box that is the civil law system that contain the Chinese law. And for this kind of reason, that is important, the link and the relation between the civil law and the Chinese law. And this is a theoretical approach to the Chinese law, but at the same time is the only right approach if you really want to understand how the Chinese civil law or the Chinese law work. And then if you want to just to have a more practical approach, what I suggest to you is just to pay attention to all the sources of law, because you must understand that the first law about the sources of law was enacted in March 2001 and amended in 2015. So while for us, for the European, one of the main issue is the source of law, but we can pay attention to Justiniano in about 554, is about to 1,500 years ago. For the Chinese legislator, the approach to the source of law is very young. And I think that according to me, I just wanted to underline again that this is the main warning when you want to approach the Chinese law. Pay attention to the sources of law, and then pay attention to the translation, and then never forget just to read all the text of the law. Because just an example, now in China there is a new law for foreign investment. And if you read the first article of this law, the meaning is that China wanted to open the market to the foreign investor. But, then if you read all the article and the content of the text of the law, you can see that China obliged the foreign investor to a lot of control. The foreign investor must to produce a lot of report. So China opened the market but control the foreign investor. It's for this kind of reason that you must read all the content of the law. Never pay just attention to the title of the law, and never stop just to read the first 2 or 3 articles of the text, but read all the text, because only if you read all the text of the law or the text of the regulation, you really understand the deep meaning of the law. So, which is the model adopted by Chinese legislator? The model, is between Chinese civil law and common law. And with the written law, China has the hardware of the law, because you can find the written law, but the written law is the fixed part, but at the same time there are also some variable part. So the software, hardware versus software, because China in 2010 introduced the guiding case. So it's very important, the rule of the jurisprudence. So if you want just to research about contract law, now you must pay attention to the Chinese civil code, but at the same time you must to see if there are some guiding cases of the People's Supreme Court, or some interpretation of the contract in the civil code produced always by the People's Supreme Court. So that is very important just to pay attention always to the source of the law. It's for this kind of reason that, I think that the model that is chosen by the Chinese legislator is an instrument just to deal everyday life situation at the same time in the huge territory of China. So you have some written rules that are valid for all China, but then there are some local regulation, or some local regulation, and at the same time there's the rule of jurisprudence that wanted to face with the day by day that changement of the Chinese life. So I think that if you ask me, but this is the best solution, I don't know if is the best solution, but it's very interesting that this is a new model that I think that is very important also to face with this new model. So what I told you is just some seeds about Chinese law. I didn't pay attention to a specific issue, but just to give you some information about warnings, the history and the evolution of the Chinese law, and at the same time the characteristic of the nowadays Chinese law. So now I would like just to to stop, and if you can turn on your video, and so we got just the chance, just if you have some question, or just to talk about this issue. So thanks a lot about this. And here there's the website of Chinalex, that is website where you can find a lot of information about the Chinese law in double language, Italian and English, and you can subscribe. Is free of charge, so is no, you do not have to pay any money. And at the same time, here you can find the link just to download my book about the Chinese contract law. And here there's, I compare the Chinese contract law and the Roman contract law. Is Italian, and now I'm preparing the English version. So grazie to everybody, and I always say to my students that don't abandon your dreams, keep them alive, and cultivate values, knowledge, excellence, creativity, and bring within yourself the possibility, because if you want something, you can reach your dream. And I always tell them, I want you to be the best of anything that you can be. So Malvina, thanks a lot for your support, and I'm here just for you and your colleague.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Dr. Toti. It was really clear and impressive. Now we'll start with the Q&A section. All attendees need to direct message me here on Zoom with all their questions. You will also need to clearly state whether you want me to read your question aloud or you want to directly ask it. While I start collecting your questions, I will start by asking our speaker, Dr. Toti, some questions that our webinar's team prepared. The first question is, the reason for creating the website Chinalex, as mentioned on the website itself, are spreading and transmitting the competencies acquired in the course of 2 decades. They intend to stimulate all those who are interested in approaching the study of Chinese law and to involve them in gradual comparison with the relative system. So, was there a lack of this kind of information provision in your opinion? And if so, why do you think this is the case?
Okay, Malvina, thanks a lot for your question. In Chinalex, what I did my best is just to collect all the information that you need just to approach the Chinese law. So, for example, there is you can find the list of all the website about Chinese law, and then you can find there is the list of all the different minister of China, and all of the information about the National People Congress. You can find all the information. And so if you want to approach the Chinese law, believe me, and if you study all the information that you can find in Chinalex, Malvina, then when I approach Malvina, for me it's always very important just to have a method. So you can find all the information, and step by step you can improve your knowledge about Chinese law, because you can find the hardware, but then you can find also the software, because at the same time I do my best just to update and just to choose, Malvina, the right information. If there's a regulation of the local city of Anhui province, no, I do not publish this kind of information. But if there are some important information about contract law, IP law, labor law, some important decision of the People's Supreme Court, Or, for example, now there's a new regulation about the you can find e-commerce live streaming that you must to choose the right platform with some characteristic. Okay, you can find these information that have a concrete approach to the real life, because I think that for everybody of you that you are very young, that is very important just Malvina to study and to have a theoretical approach. But so it's very important the theory, but at the same time is also very important to just to have a practical approach to the life.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we have another question prepared by the webinar team. What are the most evident differences between the Roman and the Chinese judicial systems?
Okay, thanks a lot for this question. You must to see that the frame is you know, is the same. But if you ask me which is the most important difference, is that in Chinese law is nowadays in Malvina is very important the rule of the jurisprudence. While in the Roman law you can find the code, the Justinian code, that a lot of written article, written law. China has the written law, but at the same time, Malvina, for this pragmatic approach of the Chinese legislator, you can find the rule of the jurisprudence. Because, please just pay attention to this. When the Chinese legislator decided to codify, what happened? A lot of Chinese jurists traveled around the world, Malvina. They went to Europe, United States, South America. Okay, then they back to China, that they have collected a lot of information. They select this information and they choose the best information, the best solution for China. I think that is very important, because everybody asks me, but why China now is the first economy, you know, in the world? Why China? But because in China, we know that China, Malvina, has a lot of a problem. We know this, you know, very well. But at the same time, they study a lot, and then they select the right information. So this is, I think that this is a very important value that that for China, Malvina.
Thank you. Now we have a question from Connor. So Connor, you can directly interact with Dr.
Yeah, no,
Toti.
great. I'm sorry, I won't be able to turn my camera on. I'm sorry about that. Thanks for an amazing presentation. It was really enlightening as someone who hasn't studied law directly. It was very accessible, so thank you. My question kind of links it to the business and culture domain, and I'm sorry if you've touched upon this because my internet has been kind of in and out. But you have, on the one hand, China seems to have very strict laws, especially around contracts and around different things that make it quite repressive in a sense to foreign investment and business coming in. It makes it very difficult, and I know that that's one of the main obstacles that new businesses entering the Chinese market face. But on the other hand, you have in practice then a cultural stigma of kind of a lack of desire to face that formality, and a lot of Chinese businesses don't feel comfortable with really long formal contracts and that sort of element of it. So you have a culture that, not that they don't respect law, but it's very much morals above law, and it's a particular culture. So how do we, as say, as European business people, etc., going over to China, how do you balance that element of needing to meet all these really strong requirements, legal requirements set by the Chinese government, versus the more sort of relational aspect of the relationships with businesses in China, where they don't really want that formality and there's kind of coloring outside the lines? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your question. This is a very good question. Concur. So, okay, I think that first we must, when we talk, for example, about the contract or approach to the law, pay attention, because the approach to the law in Shanghai or in on the coast in Beijing or on here on the coast, there's a more mature approach to the law. When you go in the countryside, the approach to the law is totally different. But this happen in every part, also in Italy. So anyway, you must understand that the law in China is very young, and so now Xi Jinping is pushing a lot for a kind of educational about the law. If you ask me, but which is the solution? The solution is just always to sign a contract, a simple contract, because the Chinese people, they really do not like the big, the contract that we are used to, with who we are familiar when we are in the United States. They prefer very simple contract, very few pages, very clear. But I think that the first step is just to sign the contract, but at the same time, just to have a very good relationship with the other part. So if you ask me, the first step is to sign the contract, just to have a very formal approach, but at the same time, you must know very well the culture of the Chinese people about the law, that is very fresh, something very young. So sign the contract, but at the same time pay attention to the human relationship with the other part of the contract. So I think that there are two different lines, but they are important at the same time. But we must start just with a contract. This is the first step. Also because, this is also the streaming of the world. And so also in China, here by here, everything will change, and there's will be always a more strong attitude to the law.
That was amazing. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now we have a question from Tim Caspers. He asked, you touched on the topic of AI in law. Can you elaborate on the role of AI in Chinese law?
Yeah, because now the Chinese legislator is using AI, for example, in some dispute about the e-commerce, and now also if the value of this dispute is not so important, this is a first approach to the AI in the law. But you know very well that the Chinese people, they really like just to proceed step by step. And so I think that this is just an experiment, but in the future, here's the role of AI will be always more and more important in China, also because now there are a lot of dispute in China, and so they must just have to find the right solution also to solve this kind of problem, because there are two disputes in front of the court nowadays in China.
And we have another question from Alice Cottone. She said, I didn't understand the difference between soft law and hard law. Can you please explain that?
Sure. Thanks a lot, Alice, for this question. For me, this question is very, very important. What I want to tell you that when we talk about the hard law, Malvina, we always must think about the written law, okay? But at the same time, for example, you can find, there are two books about Xi Jinping, toast. And so sometimes, if Xi Jinping used the radio or a TV for a message, this message is more important of the law. So when about 2 or 3 years ago, he held in a radio or in a TV, and Xi Jinping condemned the corruption. And for example, he told to all the Chinese people just to have a more simple approach to life and not to waste food. This is the first step, and this is the soft law. Now in China, you have, then there's the law. What I want to tell you that you must also, for example, you must also to read the Communist Party, the 5 years plan, because in the plan you can find some right information. But if you ask me, but is the plan a law? Is not a law, is a soft law. But if you read the plan, you can understand the outlook of what will happen in the next year about the law. Is for this kind of reason that for me is very important just to divide the hard law, because hard law is very easy to approach because you can find is the written law, but the soft law maybe a dialogue or just Xi Jinping that say something on. If you read the Communist Party 5-year plan, if you read, you understand what will happen in the next few years about the law. So this is the but why I want to tell you, because for me now, Malvina, it's very important just to have the right information, but at the same time, Malvina, you must understand in advance what will happen. Because now there are a lot of students, a lot of young people that study, but where is the difference? The difference is that if you are an excellence, and just to be an excellence, for example, you must just to understand before the others what will happen in the future. I must to tell you my personal experience when I was in China in 1997, a lot of people had fun of me because you are so exotic approach to the law because you spend some time in so many time in China, PhD in Chinese law, but because in China exists the law, and so but you must to arrive before the others. Is for this kind of reason that you must pay attention to the soft law. You must to see and discover something that the people that is with you do not see, Malvina. This is, and for this is very important, the soft law.
Now we have another question by Maria Mangoni. She asked, what is the role of interpretation and ideological context in the China law system?
This is a very, this is also very another important question. Okay, the first things that you must know is that in China does not exist the separation of the power. Does not exist. This is the first that you must, the first information that you must know. Then the second is that about the interpretation of the law, this is a topic that nobody know very well, but this is a very, very important issue. Do you remember now when we started our webinar, I told you one of the first warning is the sources of law, because the People's Supreme Court produce some interpretation, Malvina, okay? But if you wanted to know everything about the Chinese contract law, you must now pay attention to the Chinese civil code, but you must also to pay attention to the interpretation of the civil code, or to the interpretation of the different law, because the People's Supreme Court produced some interpretation, but the interpretation has the same value of the law. So if you know the text of the law, but you don't know the interpretation, you lack the knowledge of the Chinese contract law in China. Then if you ask me about some, ideological approach of the legislator, yes, but you can find, and it's very interesting that you can find the ideological approach, a very strong ideological approach, in the first article of every law, because in the every law there's the scope of the law. But if you ask me, how does the ideological approach influence the nowadays life of a lawyer, of the citizen? Not so much. But never forget what I told you before. When you wanted to know the law, and you must, if you want to understand the law, you must exactly understand the law, not to understand. You must exactly understand. You must read all the law, because, Malvina, maybe that there's only one article that changed the meaning of all the text. Never forget this. Read all the text of the law, because maybe that just one article and there's the trick or the trap just in one article.
Thank you very much. And now we have one last question. What are your tips for young professionals embarking in the study of Chinese law, and what should they be aware of when pursuing their career in this field?
Okay, thanks a lot for this question. What I can tell you is just, some suggestion according my experience. I think that now there are a lot of opportunity in China, for example, in the financial market, or in the financial approach to the law. What I suggest is just to study and research in this new issue of the law, not the contract law or trust or something very typical, but just pay attention to this new field of the Chinese law. I think that there are a lot of opportunity. According to my experience, I think that the financial market, it will be a very important field just to approach. If you ask me why, because I think that European people, compare to the Chinese or to the other, we have a lot of creativity. And so we always find the solutions. And I think that this is a very important value that we have.
Thank you very much. And we are now at the end of the webinar. Before leaving, I ask you all to wait to see the poll displayed on your screen and select the answers to the question. Thank you very much, Dr. Toti, for being here today. Thank you to all the participants for your participation and your question. And thank you to the webinar team that organized the event, and have a nice weekend. Thank you all very much.
Thanks a lot, Malvina. Thanks a lot to all of you. I think it was a great opportunity, and I really hope just we keep in touch, and do not forget to contact me for any suggestion. If I can, push your professional life, for me it will be a pleasure just to support you. And then if you want, if you can subscribe in Chinalex website, so we got just the chance just to keep in touch and just to receive the legal updates. Malvina, thanks a lot for your support. You are the best, and thanks a lot for this kind of opportunity. Ciao ragazzi.
Thank you very much. If you want to stay here for more 2 minutes, the webinar team and some member of European Guanxi would like to thank you in person.
I'm here.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.